Good morning, everybody. A couple quick reminders. I'm not sure the vendors don't even look like they're awake yet this morning, so we're up and at it before those guys. We've got the same general format as yesterday. Ross will speak here for an hour, and then we'll have 30 minutes between sessions. And then I think our next session starts at 9:30 to 10:30, and then 11 to 12, and that's our last session of the day there at noon. So just like all our other sessions, if you have questions, once Ross gets done, come on up, ask questions. Obviously, we're all here for the learning, and you guys are the hardcore coaches here for the, what like Ross called it, the hangover session. So fantastic to see all your energetic faces. It's going to be a great morning session here. So like I said yesterday, please ask questions. Raise your hand if you have a question. No question is a dumb question. We are here to help move the sport along. Ross has a fantastic passion and enthusiasm for the sport. We want to see people throw far. It doesn't matter if they're dressed in orange and black, or red and blue, or yellow and blue, or red and white. It doesn't matter. We want to see people drop bombs and throw far. So we are at your service here, answering as many questions as we can. Ross, I have known for, I was counting this up on my way here, almost 20 years.
Yeah, forever.
Yeah, a long time. Ross and I started coaching at camp, Custer Camp and East River Custer Camp, basically. So Ironwood is the throwing mecca of all throwing camps out in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Rathrum, Idaho. And that started in 1989. And a guy by the name of Terry Long, who to us is the guru of all throws coaches. This is kind of talking about the coaching tree as things branch out from one brilliant coach to another. Terry Long was a coach at Custer, South Dakota. Population 1,500. These are Terry's top 4 throwers in his boys program. 62 feet was 4th, 65 feet was 3rd, 67 feet was 2nd, and his best thrower of all time is 70 feet. Little tiny Custer, South Dakota. This guy knew the throws up, down, backwards, and forgot more than I know. And we come from that. We come from that coaching tree. So I met Ross almost 20 years ago at those camps, and Terry created Custer Camp based on Ironwood, created East River Camp based on Custer Camp, 307 Camp is based on Custer Camp, which is based on Ironwood Camp. So it's a very cool small world for us to be engaged in. But I'm very happy to have Ross here. This is going to be awesome. He's a great friend of mine, I've been a great friend, and will continue to be as long as he'll have me in his family. Ross, some statistics here. Ross was a 3-time North Dakota high school state champion, 2 in the disc, 1 in the shot. 14-time NAIA All-American, 2-time All-American in football, 12-time All-American in the throws, 2-time national champion. Ross is currently the head football coach at Buffalo High School, also coaches track and field at Buffalo High School, Buffalo, Wyoming. Ross is married to Sarah Stevens Walker, who was 14, 15, 16-time All-American at Arizona State. So throwing is kind of in the genetics. Ross has 3 kids, and they are going to be whatever they choose to do, whether it's throwing or swimming or tiddlywinks, they're going to be fantastic.
The only rule in our house is non-soccer.
Yeah, there you go. Love it. Love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend Ross Walker.
Now, I do have one thing to correct what Aaron said. We're not waiting until the end if you guys have questions, right? If they come up, just ask. This is my 18th year teaching. My real job is a science teacher, but my passion is coaching kids. I've been fortunate enough that I coached a really small school in Wyoming for my first 2 years. I hadn't stepped foot in Wyoming until I actually interviewed for a job there, but at the time, North Dakota teacher pay was not very good. Wyoming offered some opportunities, and that's what got me in there. Sarah and I got engaged, and I moved down to Arizona, and then I went from a school of K-12, 110 kids, to a high school in Arizona with 3,100 kids. So we had some phenomenal resources, and our last year coaching there, we had over 300 kids on our track team at Desert Vista High School in Arizona, and we had over 60 throwers. So that presented a whole another set of challenges, but it really forced a lot of the concepts and things that we were able to do. I also, Dave Dumble was the Arizona State throws coach while my wife was there. What did we decide last night? That Dave had 7 consecutive NCAA shot put champ.
Yep. Indoor or outdoor.
Yeah, indoor, outdoor, men's, women. So the really cool thing was I basically got to have like a 4-year internship that obviously was not paid. I just went to watch practice. And it was so cool because like I was just a fly on the wall and being able to watch like my wife's teammates like Ryan Whiting and Jordan Clark, you know, Ryan's 2-time indoor world champion shot, and just literally trying to like watch, like, okay, I think it was this, and then they would say, well, hey, did you think about this? And I would go like, not even saying anything, just trying to observe and watch and see parts of it, really forced me to be able to grow. And it was one of the coolest things I think I've been able to do just within my coaching career is just be part of that. So, if you guys look at the bottom, so Ironwood, I know that Aaron had talked about that. Aaron's been out to it. There is nothing like it. So my wife is camp director now, after Jared Roman passed away a few years ago. She had taken over. We turned it into a commuter camp instead of like a camper camp. And I think that really helped it to grow. And I think the big reason is parents are seeing what these camps were able to do for kids, seeing the effects, seeing how our coaches are really invested with our kids. And Sarah had to turn away. We capped it at 300 and ended up with 330 kids because we were able to find more coaches, and we still had 110 kids that were signed up to try to be part of it. So like Ironwood is, they're actually working on trying to get that to grow. Our camp, we're going to start our 8th year here this summer in Buffalo. We cap around 120 kids because of our facilities, and that builds up by about April, and our camp is in June. So we've been super fortunate to be able to have a lot of coaches and have a lot of connections. And the point that I'm getting to this is we want people that are really going to invest in kids and really try to pour their heart and soul into helping kids get better. And the really awesome thing is you know, we talked because Aaron was out at Ironwood this year, this last year as well, and this is probably one of the best groups of kids that we've ever had in terms of coaching. It was hotter than hell in Fort Wayne. Like the coolest day was 97 degrees, and kids were just dialed in and working. But it was amazing that we had such a good core group of coaches that they were just invested in pouring into kids. And that's really kind of what my goal here today is hopefully to give you guys some different tools and things like that so we can really help like all of our kids. So what I need you guys to understand is that the longer that I coach, the less it becomes a one-size-fits-all model. And you know, we've got the wide gamut of kids, whether we're like in high school. You know, you've got a freshman boy that might have size 13 shoes, and might still be 5'10". You know he's going to grow into something. But maybe he's still trying to figure out if he can walk with his 2 left feet. That you know, he's trying to work through that. You might have a converted sprinter that might have been like the 4th sprinter jumper that wanted to do something else, right? You've got every different body type, and sometimes throwers always end up getting what we call the overweight distance runners, right? You know, whether it's type 1, type 2 muscle fiber type kids, where you have maybe a slow twitch muscle fiber type kid that just wants to be able to be part of something. So we have to understand that we have to be able to try to tailor this and fit this to our kids. No single technique is the best. Find a way to make it fit your athlete. You're going to screw up. Like, I continually screw a lot of things up. We try different things. Just own it, right? And I think kids will really appreciate that. Going, hey, like this didn't quite work, let's try something else. A cue that works for one athlete may not work for another. I still use information all the time. We attend a lot of different camps. I love sitting within these because, I mean, we were just talking, I missed Elijah's presentation. We coached with Elijah at the 7-to-1 camp. And like, I was a little frustrated I couldn't make it to his because I want different ways people to reach our kids. For us, we really want to try to look big picture and then work our way down into kind of finer details and then try to make the movements as relatable as possible. And ultimately, how do we develop our kids regardless of athletic ability and level? Okay, kids are, pardon my French, the best bullshit detectors. They know if you're invested or not. And so we had, when we coached in Arizona, we had 3 coaches, my wife, myself, and another guy. And the other guy was only invested in his like top 6 or 8 kids. And the kids saw through it. And it was really difficult. We finally got him to try to invest in all of our kids, and I think that's why we were able to grow our numbers. Because our first year we started with, I think, 28 throwers, and by the time we had our last year, we had over 60. But kids saw that we wanted to coach every kid possible. So my philosophy is we want to start at the front of the ring and then work to the back. We'll teach basics to the whole group, and then depending upon where each kid is at, then we can kind of tailor it that way. As you build, you have to be able to individualize that, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. You know, my way is not the way. It's just one of many different ways to try and help kids. Where we're at, I grew up in North Dakota, and well, I mean the same thing like here. Like obviously with cold weather, like we have to be adaptable, right? You might have a snowstorm like for us that might come through that it dumps a foot of snow and all of a sudden you're stuck indoors. How do we essentially manipulate resources and time and space to be able to do the best that we can? So you have to kind of prioritize what are the big things I want to get out of this, what are the big things I want our kids to know, and then how do we adapt to them? So for us, you know, we've got right now, we're in a relatively busy time of year, which is kind of oxymoronic because the whole school year is relatively busy for us. But we're coaching mostly basketball right now, and then when we're done with that, we've got our indoor track kids 3 days a week after that practice. Right now, we're stuck in a gym, starting with med balls right now. But what we're trying to teach them is we're trying to teach them to generate power. The thing that most kids struggle with is every implement, every ball, like activity that they play with, they are already used to transferring their weight onto that front foot. And so, like especially dealing with shot put and discus, so the lightest implement that our kids throw, which is 1K discus, is still 6 to 8 times heavier than a 4-ounce baseball. Right? So we're dealing with heavy objects, and kids have to learn how to apply force. So we really try to focus on like how do we deal with starting with the ground up. So we'll talk about feet and hip placement, talk about separation or torque. There's a lot of different ways to say that. And then we'll eventually start working into timing, and we try to break this down into sequential orders. Now, we kind of do a little bit more like fast and dirty kind of order this because of us having a relatively short indoor and outdoor season. When we coached in Arizona, any kids that weren't in a winter sport, we actually started a winter club, and we would spend 6 to 8 weeks literally going through kind of our basics, our stance throws, and just making sure that our kids understood those basics. So everything that we're doing is all for right-handed throwers. Just a word of warning, if it looks crappy, it's because I'm left-handed, so bear with me. But our ultimate goal is to keep it as simple as possible to help kids find a way to make it relatable. So the first thing we'll actually do with a lot of our kids is we'll go through kind of a progression, and before they essentially touch an implement, what we end up doing is we want them to be able to figure out like how are we trying to create this force or power. And like we start with indoor shot. So what will end up having our kids do is we'll have them actually stagger their feet. Right-handed thrower will have them step back with that right foot. And what we'll tell our kids is we'll say, okay, put all of your weight on your left foot, and then pretend you have a shot with the other, and then we'll have a coach or a teammate push on that hand. So we have the kids lean forward and then try to push on that hand, right? Because whether it's baseball, football, whatever it is, we're always transferring weight to that front foot. So kids are used to that. So we tell them, okay, transfer your weight to your front foot. Okay, now push, right? And kids will feel, well, I don't have much power. So then we have them sit on that right side, and then they start to realize that they get a lot more power because we're connected to the ground. And so like my day job is science, right? And you guys probably all had this drilled in your head. For every action, there's an equal and opposite. right? So like we try to tell the kids, you're pushing on the shot itself is also pushing on you. So if they lean forward, what ends up happening is that shot actually is trying to push them back onto that right side. So we try to get them to understand that the longer we can stay on that right, the more force we can apply all the way through the shot while remaining connected with the ground. The other thing we teach our kids is what the heck is a stretch reflex. Now in shot put, we essentially have two main stretch reflexes. In discus, in discus we have two, in shot we have three. So what we tell our kids is we have them place their hand on their stomach and say, okay, pick up your middle finger and try to get your stomach as hard as you can. Right? And kids will stare at that and go, this is pointless, why are you doing this? So then what we'll have to do is take that opposite hand, stretch that finger, and then they see that different reaction. So what we're trying to get them to understand is not only are we trying to stay grounded, we're trying to be able to use stretch reflex. Because naturally when muscles tend to stretch, the first reaction for those muscles is to begin to contract. So that becomes kind of the timing piece for us. So in the front of the ring, then we'll start with essentially grip. So a lot of the kids with that shot put want to place that elbow underneath to support that shot. So what we'll actually do is we'll start with med balls, and we'll actually have them hold the med balls and try to squeeze out of their sternum. And then we're always trying to do everything with thumbs down and fingers into the med ball. So they feel the idea of trying to get that pressure and compression onto the med ball. So then when we place a shot in, so for rotational shot putters, we're thinking about having that elbow parallel to the ground so they feel that the pressure of them pushing that shot into their neck is what keeps the shot in place. Now, when we first started this, and I can talk more about this within the glide shot presentation, you know, we've got the old East Germans that have that elbow tucked underneath, but the thing was is they were chemically altered, right? They could probably bench 700 pounds and everything else, where you've got a freshman boy that hasn't hit puberty yet that might be trying to emulate that same thing and can't even lift the ball. So a lot of our gliders, we tell them the same thing, like we want that elbow to be horizontal, and then we want to drop the elbow just a little bit so it's still out to the side, that elbow's not tucked in. Because the ultimate goal is when we finish, we want to try to have them finish with their fingers out, their thumb down, to try and be able to still apply force to it. Another thing we talk about with our kids is we talk about the idea of a merry-go-round. I think simply, so we have to try to relate things simply. So whether we're dealing with shot or discus is easier to feel because the mass itself is further away from the axis, whereas shot is harder to feel because the weight is closer to our axis. So we tell our kids, have you ever been on a merry-go-round before? And you'd be shocked at how many kids, especially like as we get older, have never been on a merry-go-round. So we tell them, okay, let's say your friends think it's a funny idea to spin you as fast as you can on a merry-go-round. Right? And almost probably have some form of traumatic event associated with a merry-go-round. So we tell the kids, you know, if your friends spin the merry-go-round as fast as you can, and you're like hanging on to the side of it, what does it feel like? And a lot of kids go, well, feels like we're starting to, you know, our feet are coming up, we're starting to lose grip and get tossed somewhere into East 40 acres somewhere. And so then we tell them, what happens if you're standing in the middle of the merry-go-round? And the kids go, well, it just kind of feels like you're moving in a slow circle. So then we want our kids to understand the perspective that what we feel in our consciousness is in the middle of the merry-go-round. Because a lot of kids, when they throw discus or shot, want to feel like they're bringing it in closer to them. In reality, the longer the axis is, the faster it's traveling, but what they perceive is in the middle of the merry-go-round, whereas the discus should remain on the outside of the merry-go-round. Right? So we're trying to create these perspectives for kids in relatable ways, like how to keep the discus long in a rotational movement, and then trying to understand the shot is close, so now we're trying to kind of key the elbow, right? Where does the elbow feel like it's at? So those are some things that we will kind of start with our kids, kind of get that mental perspective of kind of what it feels like. And then like a lot of our kids, what we'll do is we'll actually, like my wife and I coach a lot together. And for her, like I didn't have throws coach in college, so everything was self-learned and going to camps and clinics and being able to observe. So for me, I want to be very technical with what I'm doing, Whereas my wife is very like kinesthetically and feel based, right? Hey, what did that feel like? So then we'll talk to our kids like, hey, try to do this, try to do this. What did that feel like? So we're trying to relate kind of the technical aspect to what they're feeling. So for us, what we'll do is we'll start with essentially the front of the ring. So the first thing we'll start with is essentially we'll talk through grip, how to hold the shot, things like that. I've got coffee, but I appreciate that. Thank you. I need a little more high octane this morning. Oh, good. So we'll talk to our kids, about grip. We'll, warm the wrist up and things like that. So we'll start with that when we start with fronts. So the big thing is imagine that, like right between these two chairs, I have this toe board. So for a lot of our kids, we have to get them to understand that we'll start from the front of the ring, and then what we're going to have them do is we're going to have them do a quarter squat, and then we think about having them push their hips forward and their shoulders back, right, to still mimic kind of that axis and keeping that weight back. So what we start with is we'll start with trying to pull that right elbow back. So rotational thrower, it's a lot easier to feel that elbow up. If it's a glider, we just have to drop the elbow to a little bit above maybe 60 degrees from parallel. So from here, then we start talking about kind of the timing. So for us, we're trying to essentially work those stretch reflexes for them to feel the timing first, right? No tape measures, we could care less how far this goes. What does this feel like? So what we start with is we'll start with what we call block, stretch, and finish. So we have our kids try to place the hips towards the middle of that sector, left hand to the middle of the sector. And what we tell them is we want that left fist to try to get to that left shoulder to create a stretch reflex across that chest. And then we're trying to work fingers out, thumb down, right? So just simple like a release drill, but what we're trying to incorporate is for them to feel that stretch reflex out of the front. After we do a few rounds of those, then for right-handed throwers, what we'll end up having them do is we have them jump and land, right? The big thing is wherever they land is probably going to be the most athletic position for their body type, right? Because like when we first started, when I first learned, like, hey, I have to be left toe, right heel, but I've got maybe wider hips and bigger feet, so that might change my foot placement. Whereas when you have a tiny little jumper that may have small feet and smaller hips, they probably can't do like a left toe to right heel instep and stagger. So we just have our kids jump, and then wherever they land, that's most likely their most athletic base and they're comfortable like competing on. So then we have those kids just try to, place their right toe underneath their right butt cheek, and then we're trying to have them extend this left side. So we're starting to incorporate the concept or idea of now this axis and where we're staying loaded. So for them, we want them to stay loaded on that right, and we talk about now that left leg through that spine now becomes a slanted axis that we want to stay back on, right? A lot of kids naturally want them to try to lean forward, but as soon as they break at the hip or hinge at the hip, we lose a lot of power. So it's trying to teach them just to be patient. Once again, no tape measure, we can care how far this goes, just work on feeling that release. So now we're starting to begin to incorporate a stretch reflex across our torso. So from here, it creates a little bit more of that stretch, and now the cue is we're trying to get that right hip to lead. So we're trying to drive the right hip while the left hand is creating that block, stretch, and finish, and they can feel a little bit more of that stretch added across that torso. Then what we'll do is from that step back front position, okay, right toe underneath right butt cheek, loaded right. Now we have our kids turn their feet. Now a lot of kids will naturally tend to lock this left leg. We are big on roughly, like a rough percentage of 7% right and 30% left, but we want a slight bend in the left knee because we want to be able to use both legs as we begin to add a rotational aspect. So now we call it non-torque, non-reverse. Now what do we mean by torque? We're talking about separation between shoulders and hips. Right now, most of everything that we do is in a non-torque position because our hips and shoulders are aligned. So now, from that step back front, as we turn, my hips and shoulders are in alignment, and now that turns my left hand, and I'm trying to pull that shot or discus behind my right side. So from here, what we're going to try to do is whether it's shot or disc, is we'll then teach the kids essentially our catch and wind, our swing, catch, and wind, whether it's shot or disc. And then from here, we're trying to think about keeping that right, that rebellion button over that right toe to keep this axis. Now, we also talk to our kids about we don't want to be balanced, right? Weight's 50-50. So if I was throwing in this direction, I jump, step back, and load that right. Wherever I turn my feet, I want to be on the balls of my feet or on my toes. But now, I want to think about keeping that belly button over that right leg and a slight bend within that left. Now, if a kid begins to straighten that left, what ends up happening is I only use one side, and I can only turn so far. And our ultimate goal is to try to get our hips in the direction of the throw. So if I don't actively use both, what ends up happening is a lot of kids will try to finish early or drop the elbow to try to push cross body to get that back to the middle of the sector. So we really try to focus on how do we now add a 90-degree rotational concept within this. So if I'm throwing in this direction, non-torque, non-reverse, and from here, belly button over right toe, we're trying to work on feeling how our kids feeling this. We're trying to take this right knee, when we tell our kids, this is the hammerhead, this is the nail. So right knee's the hammerhead, left knee's the nail. Or we're thinking about trying to hammer the nail to that left knee, but I want to turn both feet so I can extend the left to create a block off of the ground and turn the right, if that makes sense. Okay? And this is a hard concept for a lot of kids because a lot of kids want to be balanced in anything athletic that they've done, or if they think of throwing an object, the weight wants to go forward on that front leg because the mass of the object is so light that they can get away with that. So we'll start with those non-torque, non-reverses. Now to the left side, we add another concept and call it the sweep. So from here, from that stand throw, we're thinking about our 2 feet turning together, hammering right knee to left knee. And now, what we also talk about is the concept of the axis. So with our kids, if they're to put their arms out, a lot of kids generally tend to want to try to lift the ball early, and they think that dropping the elbow creates the axis or creates lift. When in reality, when I load my right, my hips actually set my axis or orbit of rotation. So we're trying to get kids to understand that if I'm balanced and my arms are out, when I load my right, this is actually setting my angle of release or my axis. So we tell our kids we're trying to sweep and turn both feet to get into the direction of the throw. When the fingers see that sector, that's when we're starting to create that block with the left side, left leg, and that left hand and arm to work through the finish. Then we add torque, or stand throw non-reverse. Now the reason I have a reverse asterisk is if they cannot non-reverse, they're not going to reverse. We talk about a reverse being a band-aid for a major vital flesh wound. Can't put a band-aid on that. We have to address the issue before we get to that. And actually, we had a girl at dad's camp from Max, North Dakota, that it was her 3rd year? 4th year. And we had drilled non-reverses, and at camp this summer, we're still hammering the non-reverses, and she finally figured out the concept of hammering that non-reverse, and she hit reverse, and she looked at me and she's like, I'm so sorry. I looked at her like, that's fantastic. And she was confused. And she goes, well, what do you mean? What we're trying to get your kids to understand is that our reverse, and I'll talk about this more, is generated by our hips. Okay? And a lot of kids, when they try to reverse, are leaving early, dropping eyes and pulling everything away. And she's beginning to apply the force within them. So, I mean, it's after 12 days of camp, where she didn't have any coaching in between that, but she started to figure that out. So now when we get to our stand throw, right? Like a lot of people call it power throw. I could care less about the terminology. Like you guys make it your own. So now we're adding separation. So if I'm throwing in that direction, now I'm adding separation. The ultimate goal is we don't want our toes to turn, especially that right side. Sometimes you have kids that are like less flexible like me. I could get away with turning that left foot as long as my right still stayed 90 degrees from my axis of rotation. But now what we're doing is we're trying to set the shot or the discus behind that hip. So I'm using a shot because it's easier to kind of get the idea of where we're placing on the hip. But now the big goal is how do we get separation? So I want the strongest part of my body to lead the implement, right? I'm trying to create this separation. So now we're creating that torque or that separation. Now our feet and left hand have to turn longer. And our cue is we want to keep the eyes back for as long as we can. And we tell our kids keep that right eye on the shot. So from here, we're thinking about trying to continue to turn feet, Eyes are back, my right eye's caught the shot. I'm letting my fingers, my feet get to the sector, and that's when I start that block with that left side. I'm extending the left while turning and rotating. I'm trying to drive right knee into left knee, left hand starting to block, and now I'm working through that front. Does that kind of make sense? How we kind of progress through that. Now that's kind of our fast and dirty. When we were in Arizona, we actually broke it down into 5 steps, but we had time for those 5 steps. Questions so far? Like I said, a lot of what we're trying to do is just applicability for kids. So here's all the different things that the terminology that like I talked through, right hand throwers, all that. If kids are struggling with orbit, we'll actually have them start with discus, so it's easier for them to feel. So same idea. What we'll actually have them do is start here, right? And we'll actually have them start, if I was throwing in that direction, we actually teach the kids to swing the discus, and then we'll actually teach them to catch and set that discus to the top of the middle of the sector. So they are trying to get the idea of that orbit in the path, and they'll actually have them wind that back down and then wind that left hand to the back of the ring. So that's kind of how we try to get kids to understand low and high points of orbit with a loaded right. This girl pisses me off. We love her. When we coached down in Arizona, she threw 156 feet as a junior, and that was her last year there. But you can see, and she was a head case. She mentally beat herself up, which we tried a lot of different things to help her with. But she was super athletic, 5'11". She could stand for 140 feet as a junior. It was one of the stupidest things we've ever seen. Now, one thing that I would fix, like after a few years, is trying to get her right hip over that right toe a little bit more. But you can kind of get the idea point of creating that orbit, right, that angle, and then we were creating that torque and separation. So, working from the ground up. Some of you guys may have heard the cue, Tony Hip. Meet my friend Tony Hip.
That's the thrower.
Right? That has to be the cue that leads our throw. So we want to try and work round up, right? So feet, knees, hips, torso, left arm, and then finally finish. Right foot must stay in contact with the ground. We talked about our right foot being the socket, and the ground is the electrical power outlet. If I leave that right at all, I've lost all of my power. Okay? So the big thing is we want our feet to rotate first and finish with the hips and feet pointing in the direction of the throw. And then we begin to add that upper body separation. One thing that we'll do is we'll actually train our kids. We'll actually start with hands on hips. Where I live, it's relatively pretty dry. We're at the base of the Bighorn Mountains. We have a lot of irrigation. So like a lot of our kids know about like running irrigation pipe and all that stuff. And so we've got some really big irrigation pipe as well. And so like a lot of our kids will relate to what's around and say, okay, put your hands on your hips and imagine place that irrigation pipe directly over your body, right? And drop it down on top of you. So we don't want our kids to lean forward, side to side. We're just trying to keep our center of mass over our hips. So what we'll start with them and have them do is basically just call the squat and go. But we're on the balls of our feet. And a lot of kids think when they squat, that we're disengaging hips like we're loading a bar and loading our back. But for them, we're thinking about trying to load our hips directly underneath our shoulders, because most of our athletic movements, whether it's going through tackling, drill, volleyball, basketball, is our hips are underneath our center of mass. So we try to kind of relate it that way, and what we'll have them do is just start with a squat and go, and we're trying to get them to accelerate as quickly as they can while leaving their feet on the ground. Then, this is the only time we ever put our kids what we call on tightrope. But what we'll have them do is we'll have them go toe to toe, and we'll have them squat, rotate, and then go. So then, if a kid is, let's say, pulling that left shoulder, their weight's going forward, so we're trying to use it as kind of a feedback tool for our kids. So if a kid is, let's say, leaning too far forward, and they try to rotate, and then they stand up, we can determine and differentiate where their mass is, and the kids can feel it. Then we'll work to staggered feet, right? Loaded right, down to a squat, rotate, and go. And once you get comfortable with that concept, you just turn it into a squat and go. Loaded right, belly button over right toe, hands on hips. squat and go, and then we're really trying to work on the extension of that left to create the block from the ground up, turn to the right. Okay? Does that make sense? Like I said, this is 20 years of stuff that we're trying to kind of fit into an hour. Okay. Another thing, if we have kids that really struggle with rotating feet, maybe it's strength level thing, whatever it may be, we tell our kids that both feet are on 2 peanut butter jar lids. Right? You don't ever watch somebody take a can of peanut butter, rip the lid off because they're that hungry, right? We have to unscrew the lid of peanut butter. So then we tell our kids, okay, you're standing on 2 lids of peanut butter, how would you open that? The peanut butter jar lid on your right foot's bigger, so you have to put more weight on it. The one on your left foot's smaller. So they said, well, we have to turn before we have to lift. Same idea for our kids, right? When we're throwing, we have to be able to feel our feet and hips turn to create lift. Whew, man, I've already gone through all this. It's like I've done this a couple times. Okay? So, fronts, I've already explained. If you guys want, I will share anything and everything with you guys. All I need is an email address and I'll send this to you guys. I know that I tend to go relatively quickly as we work through that, but if you guys want a copy of this, I will gladly share this with you. Okay, this is wonderful COVID time. We actually made an online session for ironwood, and so I'm drilling in our garage during COVID. If you take note, there's our wonderful boat that we call the polished turd. It's got 6 different shades of brown. We love it, but it's time to buy a new boat. Okay? So once again, you can kind of see a little bit better division, but what we're really trying to work on is trying to create this axis, right from my spine down to that left foot. That becomes our axis of rotation. Okay? So then what we do in Arizona with our kids when we had our winter camp is we actually broke our stance throw down into 4 different positions. So we'd have the kids start in our stand throw position, okay? And then we'd have them work to position 1. And the big thing was now we're trying to get them to get the idea of essentially going right brain, left brain. So in between two hemispheres of the brain, you've got a part of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's basically an information superhighway where literally the nerve endings are going every which direction. So a lot of kids really struggle with a right side, left side concept. So now we tell our kids, okay, there's a rope between your left hand and your right heel. What we're trying to do to go from our stand throw to position 1 is that right toe has to turn and the left hand has to begin that sweep within that rope. So we go from a stand throw to position 1, right? We're talking the left brain for the right side, right brain for the left side, and trying to get those to work together. Okay? Then into position 2, this a lot of people call like the reverse C position, things like that. We just want to make it concrete sequential for kids so we can go through that in order. So now from position 1, we're working into position 2, into that reverse C position, right? This position is absolutely awful. Our kids hate it. But we're trying to create a reactive position for our kids to get out of that stand throw with. Position 3 is trying to begin that extension of that left foot and left leg, and then trying to create that block to stop the energy and transfer it back into the ball or the discus on the right side. So in position 3, right, as we start working into 2, the left leg starting to extend, and then in position 3, we're trying to extend the left, block with the left, but try and transfer all the weight and energy into that right side. And then finally, position 4 is that finish, right? Fingers out, thumb down. Okay? Finish is non-burst, we're not switching feet, trying to teach kids how to keep contact with the ground. So, this is part of our online stuff, but just a little bit more visual of trying to see and work through. And once again, a much better view of the polished turd. So gliders with the elbow tucked under, rotational throwers, we're trying to create that separation. And we do this with both gliders and rotational throwers. Okay? we'll talk about, like, if you pull left shoulder, eye steep and stuff like that in the next session where I identify common errors and kind of different drills we can use to fix that. Okay, but there's a little bit more of that kind of full view when we put steps 1 through 4 together. Okay, this kid, as a junior, threw 171 feet for us. Placed 3rd in the state in Arizona as a junior. He started throwing halfway through his freshman year. Unbelievable, but if you look at, here's the thing that I think I'm really so proud of him for. He's still in double support, still has contact with the ground, and is working through that release. He was one of the most flexible kids we've ever coached. Right? We talk a lot about trying to get a lot of kids getting to like 270 degrees of separation. He would get to almost 360. Stupid upper body flexibility. Okay? So there. Now, the stance for reverse, the big thing for us is if we see hard action within that non-reverse, where now the hips, we have that long extended left block, and that right hip is driving through, right? And all of a sudden the mass starts to move, like our girl from Max, North Dakota. What happened was she was hitting those non-reverses so well, and her hips were finally engaged. What ends up happening is if I extend the left and drive the right, now what ends up happening? Right? The harder my hips drive, the easier the reverse becomes without losing power. So what ended up happening is she hit this non-reverse so well that her hips drove through the ball, and then created that reverse. That is when we'll teach our kids to reverse, is when we see the action of the hips begin to lead. Okay? Another concept, once again, I keep referring back to like kids' playground tools, maybe that's because that's about as smart as I am. But that double-handed scoop toy, you guys know what I'm talking about, the little backhoe toy? We talk about those handles. A lot of our kids will tell them, okay, the left hip is left handle, right hip's right handle. We want to try and drive the left handle back and the right handle forward, right? Hands on hips. So we get the idea of action of those hips to initiate that reverse. So this kid was 5'11", 280, was a complete brick. But once again, double support, he ended up throwing almost 190 feet in the discus and 62 in the shot. Hip has initiated, right? If you notice, hip is still ahead, separation wasn't very flexible because he was so strong, but hip is still ahead of the disc and still in double support and has contact to initiate that reverse, right? Round up. Okay, middle ring. Wheel position, wheel movement. Okay? So there's a lot of different ways of doing that. Like Maggie Ewan has a very specific way. Her wheel is that super tall wheel, but a lot of that's set up by her entry. We don't generally teach a tall wheel because Maggie's an athletic freak. And she can do a lot of different things that 99% of the population cannot. So a lot of us for our wheel, now if I was throwing in the direction towards the back wall, right, with that stance row, I have the kid set up 180 degrees from that. So what we start with is we'll actually start with some different wall drills and things like that. But the big idea is now we're trying to create our axis over that right side. So a lot of our kids, what we'll start with is we just start with a left leg drill. And so we just call it our tuck drill. We just want to tuck, and we're thinking about trying to keep this left toe as close to the ground as we can. We're thinking about getting our left shin to that right mid thigh. So then, this has to be, that first movement is just trying to create that tuck while staying loaded on that right. So they're in single support during this wheel, or we're just trying to get them to feel that tuck. Now, once we get that tuck, now we're trying to get them to think about trying to squeeze the knees and turn the right. Once again, we're talking about a right brain, left brain movement, which is hard for some kids. So now, as we begin that tuck, we're telling our kids we're trying to squeeze our knees to basically take our lower body, and we're trying to move it closer to our axis to speed it up, and we're trying to turn that right as we work. So a lot of our kids will start, and the first thing they'll do is stand up with that tuck. So we have to be able to try and think about keeping our same elevation. Our elevation doesn't change, our hips, our shoulders don't change. We're thinking about just trying to now squeeze and tuck with that left knee, and I'm trying to turn that right. Okay, that can work into what we call repeating wheels. These shoes are not good for turning on this front foot. Okay, so the big thing is starting with that. Once we get comfortable with that, then we think about having the cue of, oh no, we're good. I'll destroy these shoes if I have to, it doesn't matter. But we want to think about keeping this elbow over this right toe. A lot of kids want to pull that left side, throw the left hand because we're starting from a static position and there's no energy added to it. So we call these static wheels, right? No added energy, things like that. We're really just trying to get them to feel that squeeze and tuck with that turn. Okay? Now, if a kid is really struggling with that, we'll go to what we call a dynamic wheel. And then what we'll do is we'll actually have them rock back on that left to load the right, and then work into that same wheel. Okay? Yeah.
How do you prevent the kids from who they all of a sudden want to throw, 4 more inches, 5 more inches, and they speed up and they lose all control during that wheel?
So it will depend upon where the error becomes. So if you're talking about like a kid coming out with full rotation, most kids think that by being able to throw farther, they go faster. And what ends up happening is it starts out of the back. So I would have to kind of, like, we could talk about that, and I can deal with that a little bit more later. But, like the common error is like if you have a kid that drops his elbow, what's the most common coach response? We'll pick the elbow up. When in reality, that was not the cause. The dropped elbow was the effect of a cause from something further back. And generally it could be that they shift their weight or axis, so then they have to be able to support the shot, which turns into the painful free throw. It could be that left shoulder pulling, right? So maybe they're loaded on the right, but the left shoulder begins to pull, or the eyes are becoming too overactive, so then that elbow drops, they have to support that shot. So generally with kids, most of it probably comes from the back, where if they get too anxious and overexcited, they tend to over-rotate, and then they miss positions that way. So that's what we talk a lot about with our kids, is timing, and then like we'll talk about like meet prep, what's it like the adrenaline mean, like when you step into the ring and things like that, but trying to keep everything as consistent as we can. And if they throw well, we tell them to slow down more on the back, because that adrenaline will take over as they go, if that makes sense. So I'd have to kind of see that, because it's generally not something that happened in front of the ring. The cause was further back, if that makes sense. Cool? Okay. So some of the different wheel drills. We can do a lot of wall drills with the wheel. We can have kids work to put hands on the wall, right foot against it, right foot pre-turn. And what we're trying to do is just get the instep to the wall. Another wheel drill that we can do is we're basically arms length away, so left hand is touching the wall, and I'll do it on this wall here as well. But now we can work that squeeze and tuck, and we're trying to get them to get a flat foot against that wall to stay loaded on that right. So if we look on this wall, we can start here, just with that tuck, and then left hand just barely grazing the wall, that squeeze and tuck to the wall, if that makes sense. And the good news is my videos are working. Jordan Geis came up for camp 2 years ago. Repeating wheels, but I'm trying to kind of stress the time here. So here's just a tuck drill against the wall. Oh, come on, shut up and do the drill, would you, coach?
Can't imagine what you talk about here,
Oh, I've already talked a lot now.
got about 7 minutes left.
That's teaching, you gotta explain it 7 different ways. Here we go. Okay, biggest thing is, notice that the right is also initiating that turn, right? So we're still working that tuck, but I'm still trying to get that right foot to turn with that. Okay? And then here's that wall drill, right? Obviously, we can't do that with discus, just pretend you haven't shot in so we don't catch the wall at that right side, or the peck out. Okay, but same idea. Watch the right initiate, right? So the right's trying to turn as the left's trying to tuck. God, stop talking. There we go. Okay, big thing is you're noticing that the only thing that's turning me within that is that lower body, right? Not using my upper body to try to initiate that, lower body's initiated. Okay, once again, this actually, this is at Arcadia, actually. But that wheel position, once again, you can see how he's loading that right. Great axis, staying over that right. Discus is nice and long. And then working that tuck. Once again, he was super flexible, so that left was a lot taller, but that was an adjustment we had to make for Dylan. Okay? Alright, so step 2, step in. So once again, like if you're in kind of a time crunch time frame, we kind of had something in between our South Africans and our wheels to help our kids essentially mimic that entry without wasting time. So if I was going this way, let me preface this. For our younger throwers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have them begin to load their left to be able to get off of the left. A lot of kids, when they start that discus entry and wind, is they're going to wind over to that right side. Their weight shifts, and the first thing they do is they overshift, and then their body mass is leaning and changing. So for a lot of our kids, if we come up in that wind, we'll start with that swing. The left hand is directly over that left toe. We're trying to push that belly button over the left toe in our entry. And as we catch, and as that discus winds, we're trying to shift our mass over to our left side for a right-handed thrower. Now, what we'll do is we'll actually have them do step-ins. And I'm not going to worry about the heel, toe, heel, or anything like that right now. But what we'll do is we'll have them shift that weight over to that left side within that wind. And then what we'll have them do is take 3 steps to essentially get to that kind of reverse 7, where that linear path their toe is going to follow to get that left toe down to the front of the ring. So from here, whether it's discus or shot, if the kids have a discus, we'll have them stop, recatch, rewind, load the left, and what we're trying to get them to do is point the toe and increase the shin angle, okay? What we mean by that is if we're going to sprint, the first thing we have to do is change the angle of that shin to be able to create linear momentum. So, from this linear movement, with that loaded left, we're trying to change that shin angle, and then what we're having the kids do is we're having them step in, pre-turning that right underneath that left elbow, whether it's shot or disc. So we're stepping into that wheel. So it's a step 2, right? Step 2 to a step into that wheel. Okay, so now we have a little bit of added energy and momentum into that. So shot or disc, that's step 2 to step in. Loaded left, okay? Step 2, and then we'll step in to that wheel. Okay? What we're looking at is we're looking at an eccentric load of that right leg. A lot of kids tend to reach to the middle, and then all of a sudden we lose our hips. So the goal for our kids, and the cue is we're thinking down with that right, down. We're trying to create the eccentric load. Basically meaning we're trying to stretch the muscle under tension and under load. So, from that step in, a lot of our kids want to try to reach to the middle and we lose our hips. So we tell a lot of them we're thinking about stepping in to go down, down, to load that right. Now discus we can get away with less of that step in because we've got an extra 14 inches. For a rotational shot, we have to be able to create that load because we're creating lift out of the back to load the middle.
Is
Yes.
you grounded in your step-ins the entire time?
Yes.
What's the difference between your step-in and your step-in?
We are not leaving double support yet. So even then in our step-ins, we are getting to double support. And so the only time we're in single support is when you step in, pre-turn the right, but everything's mainly trying to keep double support and trying to keep control, prevent our kids from trying to be over anxious.
That's just what I was gonna ask you to demonstrate also, is we have a lot of kids who lose their left shoulder in attempting to turn into the ring instead of thinking of this as a linear drive. Can you demonstrate that for a second?
Yep, and one thing that we can do here, Dad, come on up here. One thing we can also do is if you've got a kid that's super overactive with that left side, and what they'll want to try and do is throw that left hand, is we can have a coach that'll stand in, or as a coach, they can grab left hand, left wrist. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get our kids to think that we're pushing the left hand to the middle of the sector to move. So as I step in, he's trying to help push that left hand to the sector, and when that right loads, he's going to stop the left hand at the back of the ring. So if you see a kid that's really over-rotating and throwing that left, first thing we'll do for them to feel it, and I know I can be rather intimidating for a lot of kids, and my wife is even more intimidating, but like we'll step in and say, okay, don't hit me. And the kids will stare at you and go, shit, right? But then, we're trying to get them to think about clearing past it. If you've got an overactive kid, and all of a sudden they look at you, and they think you're gonna beat the crap out of them, right? Then you can go, okay, here, don't grab that left wrist. But a lot of kids will generally tend to fix this because they don't realize that they're opening those shoulders. So now they can work to step into that and then push, if that makes sense. Okay? Now if they're struggling with that left hip and getting through, then you can also put that right hand on that left hip. And as we start that wheel, push that left hip down. If that makes sense. Cool? Questions there? Okay. So there, most of it, what we're trying to do is keep contact with the ground. Now we have to be able to go from double support to single support to non-support. Right? We have to leave the ground. And this is where a lot of kids struggle because they feel they have to generate energy with their upper body instead of trusting that their lower body is trying to generate. So now we'll start to our South African. So once again, our toes are pointed in the path that we were trying to get that left foot to the left side of that center of the ring. So now, what we're going to try and do is same idea, but now we're going to still try to get that left toe and left knee and that shin angle point to the middle. We're trying to load that left. And now, what we're really trying to tell our kids, we're starting to add a little bit more of that sweep. Right? Everything has been nice and controlled. But what we're really trying to think about is I tell them a field goal kicker. Not the 6-letter S word that is communist kickball. That's not a word that we say in our house. So we talk about trying to kick a field goal from the outside. So with that loaded left, trying to create that shin angle, right? What I'm starting to do is I'm starting to get that left arm tip way past that left toe and discus is behind. We start from a static position first. We don't want any wind or anything where we're trying to create separation. The first habit is kids will throw that left side in. So from there, what we do is we just start static, catch, wind, and we tell our kids we're thinking about trying to drop the shin angle and I'm trying to kick the field goal to get that right hip ahead. Okay? What I'm looking for is I just want to create separation early and often. We're getting right hip ahead and right hip moving. So now the kids have to think about trying to drive in the direction they're trying to go. So it's all linear movement where we're trying to get that hip ahead and then begin to try and start into that wheel. So from here, we're trying to get the instep, inside the knee, inside of that right side. And now we're trying to kick to go. Okay? Shin angle and trying to create that sweep. Once again, not allowing that left side to turn and work. We tell our kids we're trying to take the left hand, we're trying to push it up a ramp in the middle of the sector. Okay? Give myself a little more room here. But loaded left, static, eyes and left hands into the sector. I change that shin angle, right? Trying to create that drop to the middle and trying to create that sweep to try and keep that separation. Does that make sense? Now how we're trying to add that non-support phase. We're getting off of the ground. Okay? Once again, just some terminology as we work to that. Most kids are really good about right side. A lot of kids don't know about their left side. And so we actually spend a lot more time coaching the left side, which is weird to think about. But a lot of what the left side does influences the right side across the axis of the body. Okay, we can do static, which I showed you guys. Dynamic, if a kid is really good about not letting that left sweep, like Jared Rome was really big, he called it the line of power. But if there was a wall down the left side of the ring, that left hand stops at the line of power. So he was trying to create that line to go. If they are good with that static, then we'll add that dynamic. So once again, still loaded left. Now I'll have them kind of start like our discus start, where we push the left hand now out over that right toe. And now what they have to do is that left side has to turn and then stop to the middle of the ring, and we're adding that shin angle. That becomes that dynamic start. So now we're adding a little bit of upper body rotation. That's a natural movement. Or we're letting that left hand and that left knee drop over to the middle to begin to create an eccentric stretch across our groin. Okay? That becomes that dynamic start. But we don't do that unless the kid is good static, and that's really hard. So Jordan was a little open, but he really did a great job of stopping and catching. This is something like he threw for 1.5 years for us. And this is something we were trying to work. We couldn't get him to not open the left. But our cue for him was, like, we're not going to be able to fix the left right now because it's like the last 3 weeks of the season. So we just told him, your job is to set the hip and the discus to the middle of the sector and just wait. Because he just wasn't experienced enough to close the left. So we had him actually point and set the discus in the hip. And that really helped. Here's another drill that we do to kind of work the left side. These are called run-throughs, whether it's shot or disc. Okay, still working that instep. It's amazing when you watch yourself on video, you're like, just shut up and do it. Okay, so we're talking about like when the left opens. Well, what we're trying to do is this is actually a drill for discus entry. We just call it a run through. If you've got a kid that's over sweeping that left side and he's really struggling leading with that chest, we have him run through the front of the ring. Because that tells us that the left side is stopping. Okay? If he over rotates, he's not going to be able to find that midline of the ring. So we did as a run through to get them to feel that they've set that direction in that linear direction from a rotational movement. Okay? We can also do what we call a run back. You can do this from a full as well. But if you've got a kid that's over rotating big time and it's really throwing that left side, have them do a run through and then forces them to feel the timing of when to get off of that left. If that makes sense. And there's a run back. Okay, so then you can complete the pull. So if a kid is really good here, but then they start to lose it and we don't pull that shoulder, we can actually, because our cue is we want left hand to sector, left hand to the back of the ring until the left foot lands. So if a kid's pulling that left shoulder, you have to do a run back, and if you pull the left shoulder, they'll come off that midline. If the left shoulder is loaded over the right, they can run straight back. Okay, I'm a little long, but we'll take a couple more. Okay. So, working into entry, if we have an advanced thrower, we'll go roughly 50-50, as long as they don't overload the right side. Our big goal, even if they're 50-50, we're trying to have them still push that left side out. If it's a more younger thrower, less experienced thrower, load the left, and then push it out, if that makes sense. Okay? So, wind the discus, create separation, wind the left arm inside of the left knee, left toe. We're thinking about keeping that left arm in. If you have a lot of kids that pull this left shoulder, thumb down. Okay? Because a lot of kids will pull like thumb up or thumb out. They tend to want to tighten and pull this way. That's a lot stronger. Thumb down, it deactivates a lot of muscles within that shoulder, which forces them to keep that long. Okay? Okay. Single support. So as we work into single support, what I really want you guys to think about is our trigger and our cue for this is we are trying to turn the left and we are trying to create as much of a stretch as we can. We're trying to keep our feet on the ground for as long as we can, keeping this left elbow inside that left knee, and then once we feel that stretch, we're trying to kick the right out. Okay? Now while that's happening, the left side is still trying to turn, and me and Sharon are trying to drop to the center to create that sweep. The more that I can drop that knee, the more stretch I create, and then once my fingers see that sector, that's when we want to try to begin to start that sweep, if that makes sense. So a lot of this is just more timing than anything else. We can go through order drills, different things like that, but Our big thing is really trying to get kids to feel that stretch to start with, and try to create that kind of eccentric reactive stretch, and then try to get that right foot wide. If we tell kids, hey, just sweep the right, a lot of kids will just push the right out, but they won't turn that left. So we're really trying to change our tune and really trying to feel more of an active left. Another way to think about it is if you've got a cone that's right here, we want to try and tip the cone with that left foot. So we're trying to tip that cone to begin to start getting that left side turning while trying to create that right side sweep. Okay. Kind of talk about non-sport single sport, stuff like that. Let's see if I can try to do a turn on this wonderful carpet. So the big thing is from here, we'll catch a line, left side inside that right knee. And what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to push that left heel forward and trying to feel that stretch with my toe and instep trying to lead that throw. If that makes sense. Right? I'm trying to utilize this shin angle and drop coupled with that stretch. And once I feel my fingers get to the middle of that sector, that's that trigger to push and start that sweep. Let me see where we're at here. Okay. I'm already sweating about not chopping. Okay? It is 9:10, we got about 20 minutes. You guys have any questions so far? I'll cover a lot more in the corrections and errors in the next session.
Is this all on videos and stuff?
It should be, there's probably something on my end if I don't figure out what they share, but I'll share these presentations with you. So if you guys want, I've got a sheet of paper up there. Just put your name on the side, and if you want this, I will share all of these presentations with you guys.
I think Johnny's uploaded everything that you sent, he and I,
Perfect.
to their site.